Just introduce myself first of all. My name is Brian Daniels. I am from the Citizens Commission on Human Rights in the United Kingdom. It's an international organisation. And I am, believe it or not, a native of Dorset. I may not... Oh, well, thank you. I may not have the accent anymore, but I can still do it if requested. However, it's great to see... it's great coming back. I like coming back down to Dorset, and specifically, my mum lives just outside in Wimborne. So, you know, I know the area well. It's great to see it, and thank you for being here tonight. And thank you to the Bournemouth British Constitution Group for inviting me, specifically Dwayne and Oliver. Thank you very much. Now, tonight, obviously you can see from here, it says the marketing of madness, are we all insane? That's the subject that I just wanted to go over tonight, and... No, that's okay. I mean, when the video plays, there's 5 sections of DVD that I'd like to play tonight, and they cover various aspects of what's going on within our society that says, it questions, are we all insane? And I think it will probably make itself clear as we go along. Now, there's a primary question which I always pose. It's somewhat rhetorical, but how has the psychiatric pharmaceutical industry flooded the market with dangerous, partially tested drugs, that's partially tested drugs, that are designed to alter human behaviour? That's what we're looking at. We're looking at something that's designed to alter human behaviour. Now, it's all about psychiatric drugs, this, particularly, you know, because if it's the marketing of madness, are we all insane? Well, what's driving you there? I mean, I'm not going to beat around the bush. It's a controversial subject. You know, I don't... Whichever way you look at it, I mean, I'm here in a group that deals with controversial subjects. So I'm pleased to be here amongst that sort of people. But the facts here tonight are something that I want you to know about, and hopefully that you'll take away and you'll see what you can do with them. Be informed. Now, psychiatric drugs, they're mind-altering drugs that affect the mind. They've been marketed as the cure-all for the pressures of life. You know, let's face it, we're here in the 21st century. We've got plenty of pressures going on. You know, there's stresses of life. You know, I'm not going to beat around the bush on that. We all know that. Now, the problem is that psychiatrists prescribe the drugs, these particular psychiatric drugs, for everything from learning and behavioural problems to bedwetting, aggression, educational difficulties, juvenile delinquency, criminality, drug addiction, and, let's face it, relationship problems. You know, it goes on. But these are the things that psychiatrists are prescribing the drugs for. And actually, even the elderly, they don't get away with it either, because psychiatrists have found particular drugs that they're going to prescribe to the elderly and, you know, make them supposedly feel better. I don't think so. Now, the documentary Marketing of Madness, Are We All Insane? It explains how a mental disorder and a physical disease, disease or illness, how they are different. Psychiatrists would like you to think that they're not, you know, that it's in the same ballpark. No, they're not. It also goes over how psychiatric drugs are approved, how they're actually, you know, how do they get onto the market? How is it that they get past all these tests? It also shows how people become guinea pigs for the psychiatric pharmaceutical industry. Now, people do, you know, again, people do suffer from mental disturbance, no matter what. No matter what. They have unwanted emotions, they have behavioural problems. You know, we're not denying that. The problem is what happens once that is diagnosed. Now, people are told that unlike a mainstream drug like insulin, and most people heard of insulin? Yeah, okay. Yeah. We're not doctors, but we've heard of insulin. Okay. Now, psychotropic medicine, insulin targets something. It has a reason, it has a purpose. And it's to do with, as far as I know, diabetes. But I'm not a doctor. But psychotropic medications, that's mind-altering drugs, they have no measurable target illness. They are not being prescribed for anything that they're targeting. I don't know if that's new to you, but the point being is that if you're taking a psychiatric drug, a mind-altering drug, what is it being given for? Where is, for example, I'm going to use the old, you've heard of ADHD, hyperactivity? Okay, so I'm not talking something you don't quite know about. Okay, hyperactivity. The drugs that are given for hyperactivity, what is it targeting? It's targeting behavior. It's targeting behavior in a young child, or indeed an adolescent. And now it moved into the adult area. So, there's no target illness. There's not an actual illness, something physical. Now, also, these drugs can upset the very balance of natural chemical processes that the body needs to run smoothly. Now, in medicine, strict criteria exist to actually call something a disease. To be classified as a disease, a condition has to have a predictable group of symptoms. Now, you know, we're all human. We've all had illnesses. You know what a symptom of a cold is. You know, let's say a runny nose. That's a symptom. So for something to be, now, let me just go back to that. It has to have a predictable group of symptoms, and the cause of the symptoms, or an understanding of their function, must be proven and established. So we have a symptom. What's the cause? What's the thing behind it? Not what's the runny nose. We can all, you know, take something and stop a runny nose, but what's the cause of the problem? Chills and fevers are symptoms, in case you didn't know. Maybe you did. Now, malaria and typhoid are examples of diseases, just as cancer or measles. Those are diseases, but chills and fevers are symptoms. Psychiatry deals solely in symptoms. Diseases, by the way, can be proven to exist by evidence that can be seen with physical tests. You can actually do a test and you can see it, you know, with your own eyes. You are the judge of that, not somebody else telling you that it exists, and you better believe it. That's what I'm trying to get across here. Now, psychiatrists, this is has anybody here been to a psychiatrist? Just so let me... Okay.
Forcibly.
Thank you for being here tonight. I mean that. Well done for making it. Well done for being here. Good man. Psychiatrists do not, I repeat, do not inform their patients that psychiatric diagnoses are based only on opinions. It's their opinion of whether you're ill or not. There are no x-rays, there are no brain scans, there are no chemical imbalance tests to prove that mental disorders exist as a biological problem. In other words, something to do with the body. There are no tests. I just want to make sure that that's understood. There's no tests. Excuse me. Gentleman there. There were no tests done when you went to... Right. You can confirm that. Thanks for answering that, because I was hoping there was somebody who could confirm that. Now that failure to inform, that violates patients' informed consent rights. We're talking about informed consent. You, as individuals, have the right to informed consent. Whether you know it or not, you do now. You know, I'd like you to take that away with you. You know, if nothing else, you have the right to informed consent. You don't get that with psychiatry. I mean, there's no question that people do experience problems and upsets in life that can be serious. There's no doubt about that. But the doctors today, many doctors feel that today's solutions, that mental disorders exist as a biological problem. No, doctors believe that they know that it masks the symptoms. Let's just go that route a moment. They know it masks the symptoms. They're not looking for the cause. Yeah. Now that's what this documentary is about. We're looking at what is going on to actually bring about this whole charade of where it's a system. That's right. It's an industry. And it's profit-driven. How do the drugs affect the body? You've got chemical compounds in your body. You've got natural processes going on. You've got, let's say, you eat food, you drink water, you receive sunlight. You get chemical processes that occur as a result of those things. and it makes you healthy. You know, there's things going on. They're the natural processes of life. And there's millions of them. Putting a foreign substance like a psychiatric drug, or specifically a psychiatric drug, into that, it disrupts that normal chemistry. Your normal chemistry does not function the same way when you take a psychiatric drug. I think you know that. You know, you put any foreign substance into your body, you're going to get something that goes wrong. You know, put petrol in. You know. It's not normal to put that in. It's not normal. I just a little thing. I spoke to a nutritionist and I said, what was wrong with that particular person, a little child? And they said the child was deficient in vitamin C, which is why they were having a particular problem with whatever was going on. But the child, whoever the child had seen, had put the child on Prozac. What the nutritionist said was, yes, but the child was never deficient in Prozac.
Yes.
You know? They were deficient in vitamin C. And that's the key. What is the physical problem? Now, psychiatric drugs again, they can create a temporary false feeling of being high, a bit of euphoria. Not to go back to the gentleman who did put their hands up, but I don't know if that's real to you. You know, did you feel that euphoric thing? Okay. You may. It can occur. But it's short-lived bursts of increased energy that come about from taking these psychiatric drugs. It's not normal to feel like that. You know, it's like, you know, you huge amounts of energy, then not. Huge amounts of energy, not. You know, that's not normal. You know, well, some of us can be very energetic all the time, or some people just, you know, they go along in a normal, ordinary way, but they're not like this. That's not normal. But the drugs can create that elevated energy. Now, it's a bit like, I'm going to show you the first chapter of the Marketing of Madness now, but I just want to, the last point I want to make is, like a car that runs on rocket fuel, okay, you can go 1,000 miles an hour down to the end of the road, but the tyres and the engine and everything about that car, they're going to fall apart. So just think of that when you think about psychiatric drugs and what they do to the body. The first chapter is called Are We All Insane? And have a look at it, take it in, and I will invite, if I may, some interaction afterwards, just to see what you thought of it. Because there's 5 bits we want to show you. But here's the first one.
There is no denying that psychological and emotional problems, even severe mental distress, can affect most anyone. But does this mean we are all insane? What causes psychological distress? Early psychiatrists thought it was an imbalance of the humors that could only be cured by bleeding patients with knives or leeches. Other psychiatrists believed mental problems came from organs like the tonsils, the stomach, and the spleen, and cut them out. Later were attempts to alter brain function, but these efforts also failed. Today, psychiatrists tell us that the way to fix unwanted behavior is by balancing brain chemistry with a pill. Did they get it right this time?
They say you have a chemical imbalance of serotonin and dopamine, but there's never been a study to ever prove that, ever. It's just been indoctrinated into the culture and television advertising to the point where people now believe it is fact.
Despite this lack of evidence, psychiatrists will tell you that psychotropic drugs are just like mainstream medical drugs. Can this be true? The answer is that unlike a drug such as insulin that corrects a measurable and proven imbalance in the body, psychotropic medications have no visible or measurable physical abnormality to correct. Here is evidence of a bacterial infection. Here is the psychiatric disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Here is a broken arm. Here is major depressive disorder. This is a brain tumor. And this is bipolar disorder. Which raises the question. How can you medicate something that is not physically there? The answer is, you can't. And furthermore, because psychotropic drugs are specifically designed to get past the body's natural defenses and into the brain, they can upset the very delicate processes the brain needs to ensure the body runs smoothly.
Every time you throw something into the system that's foreign to the system, you're creating imbalances elsewhere within the system.
The body changes as a result of taking the medication, so when you stop taking the medication, the body's got to change back to the way it was before, if it can, because it can't always. And in doing so, it disrupts the whole system.
This is what creates the sometimes serious side effects.
Paxil was the drug that gave me insomnia. I would cry very easily on it, and I completely lost my appetite within the first 2 days of taking it.
It didn't help me study, it didn't help me do anything. I didn't even want to do work because I was so sick.
Psychos didn't help me at all. They made matters, I'd say probably like 10 times worse for me, maybe even 20.
Only now I was further impaired by the medications, and I started having car accidents.
They put me on slow off, and it made me want to kill myself.
I realized that those drugs were just destroying me. Even when I was on them, I realized that they were destroying me.
In spite of the crippling effects of their drugs, psychiatrists and drug companies have used them to create a huge and lucrative market worth billions. And they've done this by naming more and more of life's problems as medical disorders requiring psychiatric treatment. For example, shyness becomes social anxiety disorder. Loss of a loved one, major depressive disorder. Homesickness, separation anxiety. Suspicion, paranoid personality disorder, having ups and downs, bipolar disorder. Distractibility, ADHD. This is why it is almost impossible for anyone to see a psychiatrist today and not be diagnosed with a mental illness. And a diagnosis of mental illness means psychotropic drugs.
When a patient goes into a psychiatrist's office and asks for help, probably 98, 99, maybe even 99.9% of people are going to receive a medication.
And these medications have been estimated to cause over 700,000 serious adverse reactions a year and 42,000 deaths. Meanwhile, the psychiatric industry rakes in $1/3 of $1 trillion a year. The issue isn't whether or not people's emotional problems are real. They are. What we really should be asking is, how did psychiatrists convince people that these problems were signs of mental illness? How did they use these illnesses to create a demand by doctors and the public for psychotropic drugs? And how did these drugs, with no known curative powers and a long list of side effects, become the standard treatment for every problem in life?
It's an interesting sound that comes with it. I hope that didn't distract too much from it. What's your thoughts?
Well, it's all airy-fairy.
Okay. Thank you.
well, no, there's nothing tangible. The only tangible you have, a concrete thing, is that someone doesn't look to them, doesn't follow the norm in their mental state. I.e., they may be sort of a sociopath. You know, they may show signs of this sort of disorder to the obvious average man in the street, but it's still someone's opinion.
No one's defined what normal means. The word normal didn't enter the language until the beginning of the 1800s. Everyone was accepted for what they were.
Go, I can tell you're free-thinking men and women here. Wow.
But the other point is I'm trying to think of the Bible, which is produced in America, which defines all diseases and everything else.
I don't need to show this, you're already coming up.
they prescribe. This is not just not for psychiatric; it's for ordinary uses, non-psychiatric uses.
Okay.
I mean, they're defining new illnesses which are a result of having been prescribed drugs. So therefore, they prescribe other drugs. And this Bible, I forget the name of it now.
It'd be the DSM.
The what?
The DSM. Diagnostic and Statistical Manual? Okay.
No.
Physician's Desk Reference?
No.
Okay.
No. Anyway, it's doubled in size. Anyway, it's the Bible for the whole world.
Okay.
The point is the people administering this Bible are connected with drug companies.
Yeah. Who would have thought it?
Who would have thought? Just coming back to you, sir. I'll be right with you. I just wanted to just come back to the gentleman here. Absolutely spot on. Airy-fairy opinions. Yeah, it is. It's opinions about what somebody thinks about a set of behavioural conditions.
I refuse to get into the debate on what is normal. We all have our accepted opinions of what is acceptable, and we all know what is meant roughly by normal. You can be here a week trying to define it and so on, but in as much as the general accepted term, I base everything more or less on that and move on rather than trying to define it, because it's like trying to find smoke.
Or the taste of chocolate. But thank you, yeah, good point. Gentlemen.
Yeah, there is an issue really between the world of psychiatry and psychology. Psychiatry is basically, as you say, it's all on these hocus-pocus disorders.
Yes.
But there is a blending through the two. The world of psychiatry is where basically the most evil comes from. I would refer to Dr. Spock, not of Space Trek.
Okay. It's the only one I know. But go ahead.
But there were books many years ago in the 60s written by a supposedly eminent doctor called Dr. Spock.
Okay.
And that is where the whole world of psychiatry basically emanated out of Hollywood. All the celebrities. Oh, I have to go see my shrink this week.
Yes.
The money industry, that's where I would say it evolved out of.
Thank you.
Dr. Spock was something to do with how to rear babies, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think you got the wrong one there, Steve.
Thank you for your feedback there. Now, I mean, obviously you probably already covered, what is the difference between a mental disorder and a physical disease?
It's not Dr. Seuss, is it?
I'm gonna bring it over here. Wrecking the joint. That's better. Because otherwise I'm in the light. Of course. So what is the difference between a mental disorder and a physical disease? If somebody came to you and said you've got a mental disorder, what would you know?
No.
Okay. Good. How about a physical disease?
Well, it can be diagnosed, can't it? A physical disease can be diagnosed. Mental disorder, really, you can see a person with anxiety and depression, right? But the other ones just basically don't exist.
Okay. Yeah, I want to get across the point that you can see a physical illness.
I mean, it comes down to this concept of diagnosis. I mean, diary is through, isn't it? And gnosis is observation. It's through observation. It's like, I can see you, so I can nose you. So I will believe that. But it's like, how can you... these guys don't observe. There's nothing to observe.
Okay.
I was just told, you have a chemical imbalance at the base of the skull. Well, you haven't openly had to find that.
Well, that's right, and I mean it's
a fixed idea they've got. They're running on a fixed idea of some sort.
Okay.
I have a borderline personality, apparently. Borderline personality disorder, they call it.
Would we be able to examine you to find that? What?
Change at midnight. Go on, midnight.
Okay. But if we did examine you, would we find it?
No.
You see? You ain't going to find it because it's somebody's opinion about that man's behaviour.
I'll make one reference to an article I've just come across today.
Okay.
It's on the Times Online. It was published April 25th, 2006. It was an article by Martin Gosling all about MAPA. You
Okay.
MAPA?
Yeah.
Risk assessment.
Mm-hmm. Multi-agency.
Well, the downside to it. But right in the middle of it says, assessing risk of serious harm that a person may have was based on Professor Herschel Prinz's dictum But the best predictor or predictor of future violence is past violence. Again, an industry of non-science.
Yeah, you hear that a lot, where somebody's current state is based on what happened to them, say, 5, 10, 15, 25 years ago, you name it. It's not current.
It's not true.
The government now is saying that they can detect potential criminality in children up to 2 years of age.
Indeed.
So
they're even trying to get it in the fetus. Straight up.
The basic point is nobody in the whole wide world knows how the body really works. It's so complex. It's at so many different levels, from the macroscopic to the microscopic. You can't see that the totality of this is so enormous. It's beyond man to understand. So you start playing around with it, you just don't know what you're doing. Only God can understand.
Okay.
And you just added more complications, aren't you, when you started adding chemicals into it?
That's right. Let me go on to the next.
The concrete thing you had in that picture there, the only concrete thing that I saw was big piles of dollars.
Again, free-thinking men here, and women.
The big problem is the depravity of the drug company, which stoop to any level to make money.
Of course.
And we have the ever-revolving door at number 10 Downing Street, where £250,000 golden handshake from a drug representative is a pittance to money that the drug companies rape from the National Health Service on fraudulent prescribing of medicines to patients.
Right.
And that's it all in a nutshell.
Thank you.
It's part of the dumbing down of the entire. It's part of the dumbing down of the entire world.
Oh,
if
yeah.
you're on drugs, your natural brain, your natural thought,
and that's the whole procedure.
It all comes in together. Big pharma gets their big bucks.
And that's why our government is adamant that when a patient or a person dies, they delete toxicology and forensic pathology at the time of post-mortem, so everybody dies of a natural occurrence.
Okay.
So the drug companies can walk away of the crimes they committed, of unlicensed drugs, particularly unvaccinations given to babies and children.
Well, I'm going to cover as well what you're talking about. Let me, if I can go on to the next bit. We're going to get to where you're going. The next bit. How has psychiatry been able to reclassify this unwanted behaviour that we're supposed to have, and as well as emotional problems as disease? So in other words, how have they just taken it over from normal behaviour, well, yeah, there's that word again, normal. How have they actually been able to take that and reclassify it? Now, this next chapter I want to show you. By the way, there's about 15 chapters. I've only got 5 for you tonight, so bear with me on that. This chapter addresses the major question. There's gentlemen here I appreciate who have seen it, but has anyone seen a family member or a friend or someone who has got a mental illness? Okay. It's not unusual today because there's so much labelling going on, so many psychiatric diagnoses. Now, to market the drugs, what psychiatrists have done, they've had to convince you and me, the population, that these conditions that people are suffering from, and they are real, whatever it is that a person's having a mental disturbance, it's real. They've had to convince you and me that those conditions are the same as medical illnesses in order to be able to get into the same category. Like, for example, polio or influenza. If you can align a mental illness with a physical condition, okay, that's how you're going to get it through. Otherwise, if you and I all looked at borderline personality disorder, you go, well, where is it? Can you see it under a microscope? No, you can't. It's not possible. Also, a physical illness, when you've got a physical illness, you go get some kind of medication, you respond to it. It actually goes away. The difference between psychiatry and medicine, I do try to delineate, is that psychiatry doesn't cure anyone. It doesn't actually cure. To accomplish this whole deal of reclassification, well, first of all, there's the American Psychiatric Association. They came up with something called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. You may have heard of it. It's called the DSM. It has all these. I do. I laugh as well when I hear these different disorders. Social anxiety, shyness, for example, ups and downs, bipolar. It's just reclassification. What they've done is based on those symptoms or behaviours, they've reclassified that particular thing and included it in these psychiatric textbooks. Now, you may not know this, you may do. Psychiatrists vote on what disorders are actually in the DSM. I don't know if that's new to you. A vote, consensus. Okay, it's true. They actually vote on whether something should be in or not. Homosexuality was actually voted out of the DSM because it was included at one point. It was then voted, how many say out? Yeah, okay, so it was taken out. It was a vote. Whether it is or it isn't the point. The point is consensus. In America, these particular things are used in order to obtain insurance payments. Because if you haven't got a diagnosis, you ain't going to get the insurance money. But again, that comes down to the point of money, which has been alluded to here. It's all about the money. Because if psychiatrists can actually label somebody, they can then treat it. And I use the term loosely. Therefore, there's going to be a situation where the money can flow in. And we've heard of the stories where somebody's insurance ran out, and the guy miraculously was cured and he's out. They actually let him go. They released him from the hospital. But it's only when the insurance money ran out. The number of disorders in this thing called the DSM, this textbook, with all the disorders, there was 112 disorders when it was first published in 1952. Now, the current version has 374. So we got, like times 3 of, how mentally disabled we are. I don't buy it. There's another version called the International Classification of Diseases, which is published by the World Health Organization. That too has a mental disorders section, so it aligns with, what's going on in America too. So, whether you're in Europe, whether you're in America, wherever you are in the world, you can be mentally ill just like they are in America. But again, we're looking at it from a viewpoint of it's not what it seems.
As long as you've got the money.
Well, even if you haven't in England, it doesn't matter. The NHS will do it. Oh, if you've got private insurance, great. Yeah. And the point being is it's not generally known that these particular disorders in these manuals are not, and I repeat, not the same as medical illnesses. They are not. Medical illnesses are, you can see them under a microscope. You can see them in a Petri dish. They're real. They're visible. Psychiatric disorders are not. They're an opinion. And again, that point, the drugs don't cure them, they mask the symptoms. Let me show you the second part that I want to show you tonight. And again, I'll be interested to see your feedback afterwards.
Professionals. But whereas regular physicians have diagnostic tests to prove or disprove illness, psychiatrists do not.
There is no objective testing in psychiatry. There is no blood test. There is no urine test. There is no biopsy. There's nothing that objectively proves that there's anything physiologically or biochemically wrong that's creating your symptoms.
Cancer, you can do a screening and it's there or not. You can look at the cells and you can tell if it's there. Different diseases, you can look at it and you can see it under a microscope, or you can see it in an MRI, or you can see it in a CAT scan. With mental health, you can't see it. You can't be diagnosed in a medical procedure. It's all subjective.
So the question becomes, without any scientific lab tests showing the presence or absence of mental problems, how does psychiatry's diagnostic system work? And how did it become so prevalent? psychiatry's search for scientific grounding has been going on for well over a century. In the late 19th century, German psychiatrist Emil Kraepelin was the first to attempt to classify mental problems as medical disease states. Though he devoted his life attempting to prove that these problems came exclusively from biological and hereditary sources, he never could, finally concluding it was nearly impossible to scientifically distinguish the normal from the insane. In spite of Kraepelin's findings, psychiatrists persisted, with many efforts at classification throughout the years, resulting in the first edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, published by the American Psychiatric Association in 1952. A small spiral-bound 130-page handbook, DSM-1 described 112 so-called mental disorders, based not on standard scientific procedure, but contributions from a write-in ballot mailed to 10% of the APA's member psychiatrists. With the release of its second edition in 1968, the DSM had now grown to 145 disorders. Still not based on any science, though packed with theories on the origins of its illnesses. But with the sudden surge in popularity of psychiatric drugs such as Miltown and Valium among the general public, the psychiatric community realized that a biological explanation to justify prescribing them had to be found. And they found it in a paper written by psychiatrist Dr. Joseph Schildkraut. Though he had no means of discovering what normal brain chemistry should consist of, Schildkraut theorized that mental problems might be caused by a biochemical imbalance of neurotransmitters in the brain.
It's a great line, the chemical imbalance. There's no evidence for it. There is no way you can measure or document that such a thing occurs in the first place.
There are no lab tests to see what your neurotransmitter levels are or how much you need and how off your balance is.
Chemical imbalance sounds good, sounds scientific, but of course, as we know, there isn't any way to measure what the balance is.
There is no identifiable chemical imbalance in the human brain other than the chemical imbalance that comes from putting a medication in the brain. And so we've been told that there's a chemical imbalance, but there's no science to back that up.
Though Schildkraut was never able to prove his chemical imbalance theory, it was too late. The psychiatric community had already adopted the theory as a plausible-sounding medical explanation for the mental disorders listed in the DSM. But without a test confirming a chemical imbalance, psychiatrists were still bedeviled by a severe inconsistency of diagnosis. Not only that, but psychiatrists were often unable to tell the sane from the insane. This point was driven home in 1972 in the famous Rosenhan experiment, where a total of 8 perfectly healthy volunteers each presented themselves at a mental institution, claiming to hear voices in their head that only said the words empty, hollow, or thud. No other psychiatric symptoms were stated. The result, each of the volunteers, including Dr. David Rosenhan himself, was immediately committed into the institution.
The moment we were admitted to the hospital, we abandoned our symptom, and we behaved the way we usually behave. The question was, would anyone detect that we were sane? The answer was, no. No one ever did.
All but one was diagnosed as schizophrenic. They were only discharged after admitting they were indeed mentally ill and in remission. After learning of the experiment, the psychiatric community was furious. One hospital challenged Rosenhan to send in more volunteers, promising to catch every one of the fake patients. 3 months later, they proudly announced that of 193 patients presenting themselves, they had turned away over 41 who were pretending mental illness, and 2 suspect. The problem was, Dr. Rosenhan hadn't sent in a single person. 70 years later, Emil Kraepelin's conclusion that psychiatry could not distinguish sanity from insanity had once again been proven correct. In his study, Rosenhan concluded, any diagnostic process that lends itself too readily to massive errors of this sort cannot be a very reliable one. It wasn't just the embarrassment of the Rosenhan experiment that caused psychiatry's leadership to take a new approach to diagnosis. With the rapid expansion in the psychotropic drug business, psychiatry underwent a seismic shift in the way it promoted mental illness. And the third edition of the DSM, spearheaded by psychiatrist Dr. Robert Spitzer, took a decidedly brain-based biological approach. Unlike its predecessors, the proposed DSM-3 assumed that mental problems derived from physical abnormalities of the brain. And instead of describing possible psychological causes for mental distress, DSM-3 would simply provide clinicians with checklists of symptoms. However, these descriptions were broad enough to apply to anyone at any time of life. With no science to back them up, these newly proposed disorders and the checklists that went with them were subject to intense negotiation, compromise, alteration, and heated debate. Psychiatrist David Schaffer, who attended the DSM-3 conference, observed,
"People would shout out their opinions from all sides of the room, and whoever shouted loudest tended to be heard. My own impression, coming straight from England, was it was more like a tobacco auction than a sort of conference."
Many committees are established to determine what should and shouldn't go into the DSM current revision. And a lot of the committee activity is based upon the personal bias, political pressure, the trend that may be in vogue then, and other things that are non-medical.
Well, in the DSM, I mean, they vote in diseases. I mean, they get together, the panel of psychiatrists look and decide, is this a disease or is this not a disease?
How many of you agree this should be a disease? They have a show of hands. They said there were 20 people in the room, 12 vote for it, 8 vote against it. Bingo. They have a disease. Tell me that that's science.
One psychologist reported that during discussions of the proposed criteria for masochistic personality disorder, Spitzer's wife protested about one symptom of the disorder, to which Spitzer responded, "Okay, take it out." Scientific or not, once a disorder is voted into the DSM, it is very hard to vote it out. On rare occasions, however, this too has occurred. Homosexuality, a mental illness according to DSM 1 and 2. After gay rights activists picketed their 1973 convention, the American Psychiatric Association buckled to political pressure and decided by a mail-in ballot of its member psychiatrists to remove it from DSM's next edition.
What happened? It wasn't like, there's some objective evidence that at one point it was a disease and you cured the disease and now it's lifestyle choice. No, it was cultural. We became more liberal in this country and decided, okay, it's fine. Whereas 50, 100 years ago it wasn't fine, there's a problem. But that's not medicine, that's something else.
And the psychiatrists who wrote the DSM-3 knew it, as Robert Spitzer would admit to the BBC many years later.
What happened is that we made estimates of prevalence of mental disorders totally descriptively, without considering that many of these conditions might be normal reactions, which are not really disorders. That's the problem.
But instead of learning from their mistakes, the American Psychiatric Association published the DSM-4 in 1994. And it was even bigger, with 374 different diagnoses amongst its 886 pages. The new edition more than tripled the number of mental illnesses listed in the DSM-1. This rapid expansion in the number of psychiatric diagnoses may not help the patient, but it benefits many others. Once a diagnosis has been created, it enters the professional curriculum. Specialists emerge to treat it. Conferences are organized around it. Research and publications cover it. Psychiatrists formulate their patients' symptoms to correspond to it, and drugs are prescribed for it. The DSM, in short, was no longer a manual, but a full-fledged industry.
The DSM, although it is our Bible, it becomes the Bible and it becomes tantamount to, the tablet coming down from Mount Sinai, not just for psychiatry and psychology, but for insurance companies, for the legal profession. It comes into play as far as sentencing. It comes into play as far as custody decisions. So non-scientific information is used to make some radical, life-altering or life-ending decisions.
The danger of all these psychiatric diseases is that anyone walking the earth today could be labeled as having a mental illness. Using the DSM, psychiatrists at Harvard University have declared that half of everyone on earth will be mentally ill in their lifetime. One prominent Harvard psychiatrist, Dr. John Rady, goes a step further, arguing no one is truly normal. Though the American Psychiatric Association has quietly acknowledged the lack of evidence for Joseph Schildkraut's chemical imbalance theory, the claim is still flogged in the media and passed on to patients every day. And although you are not likely to hear it in the general media, psychiatrists readily admit that the disorders listed in the DSM have no proven pathology and therefore cannot be called medical diseases.
If you were to be confronted with someone saying that the DSM is not backed up by science, what do you have to say about that?
I would say that they're entirely right. No, the DSM is not science. I think there are non-scientific elements, political aspects of it that influence it. Yeah, absolutely.
DSM-4, this is still far away from science.
The DSM system is far from perfect, but it's the best we have.
DSM stands for diagnosis as a source of money.
Nonetheless, the next edition, DSM-5, is in the planning stages and is due to be published in 2012. And this time, the negotiation for the next new psychiatric diseases is being held in secret. But we do know some of the new disorders under consideration. One is internet addiction disorder, originally presented as a joke in the 1987 New Yorker article. Regardless, it is now claimed that 25 million people may qualify as compulsive surfers. Other disorders contemplated for DSM-5 include compulsive shopping disorder, parental alienation syndrome, relational disorder, intermittent explosive disorder, all potential disease categories with psychotropic drugs waiting to be assigned to them. According to the APA, 19 of the 27 psychiatrists on the top panel deciding on what illnesses to include in the next edition of the DSM have financial ties to drug companies. The situation got so bad that the architect of DSM-3, Robert Spitzer, and DSM-4 editor Alan Francis went public, warning the APA might well be accused of a conflict of interest in fashioning DSM-5 to create new patients for psychiatrists and new customers for pharmaceutical companies. But the psychiatric community has decided not to address this issue, and for good reason. Today, psychiatric drugging rakes in over $80 billion a year for pharmaceutical companies. And with every new edition of the DSM, the diagnoses have not only expanded in number, but cast a wider net to encompass such population segments as senior citizens, the military, pregnant women, and even children.
In my training, when I first started this, they told us that they would not give a bipolar diagnosis for a child under 18. These days, I see children diagnosed with bipolar disorder at 5 and 6 years old.
A 2-year-old can be throwing a temper tantrum and then stop and be fine. Anybody that's a parent has seen that happen. That doesn't mean they're mentally ill. It means they're 2-year-olds.
How can you diagnose a 2-year-old as a bipolar disorder? How can you diagnose anybody as a bipolar disorder if you want to look at it that way? Because there is no such thing as bipolar disorder, not from a medical standpoint. It's not like you can find a cell in a person that shows that they have bipolar disorder. It's not like they have a fever or run a temperature, like if they have a physical illness. This is a behavioral definition only. In other words, a human being sat there and made a subjective decision that this person has this so-called condition.
Today, nearly 1 million children are diagnosed as bipolar, making it more common than autism and diabetes combined. In 2007, 500,000 children and teenagers took at least one prescription for an antipsychotic. including 20,000 under the age of 6. Antipsychotic drugs, powerful chemicals designed originally for only the most seriously mentally troubled, are now a $22.8 billion industry.
If you spent days reading the newest DSM, you would be able to diagnose every human being that you ever saw. And with the diagnosis comes treatment.
The DSM most definitely helps in the prescribing of drugs. It legitimizes the process of pulling out the prescription bed. Because here is this disease entity. The disease entity is addressed with this medication.
And the DSM is in the service of making things reductionist into very simple, simplistic ways of looking at things. That makes it easier for the pharmaceutical company to create a medication for. The only thing that we've left out of that equation is the person.
And the average person is completely unaware that psychiatric diagnoses are not medical, but merely voted on behaviors. Which leads us to our next question. How do psychiatrists take these invented disorders and get people to believe they have them?
Diagnose everyone in here with conspiracy theory disorder.
Get it into the patent, man. Internet addiction disorder. Everyone got a computer?
Yeah.
No? I knew you'd say no. Okay, but, you know, how many people have stayed surfing for too long?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, and how many people... I mean, some of those things that are coming up are just... they're ridiculous, they're shocking, they're laughable.
The thing about it is, the definition of normal is actually that people are different. That's the actual definition of normal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Comes back to your point. You can't define it.
Behind it all is another one. It's if you dare speak out against the state disorder.
Definitely in Russia. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe we're a bit more covert with the punishment.
We started it here at Tavistock Institute.
Wow, Tavistock. There's another story. Okay. But again, what we're looking at here is an industry that's based on behaviours. You know, your behaviour is being scrutinised by psychiatrists. My behaviour is being scrutinised. You know, what I do, whether I do something that is deemed by you, or you, or you, or you, anyone here as normal. If you think what I do may not be normal, it could receive a frown. And if that receives a frown, then it could receive a frown from a psychiatrist. And if enough psychiatrists think it's frownable, well, okay, let's go down the route of, yeah.
The definition of normal. There is, if you read the book The Outsider by Colin Wilson, very broadly, 5% of the population, I say automatic, they tend to rise to the top because they have, by those definitions, some kind of psychotic disorder in as much as they're not happy with their lot, which manifests itself in other things, but you can have this as inventors, otherwise we wouldn't have invented the wheel if we were happy with our lot. And the best comment on psychotic disorder I ever read was just a few paragraphs on Michael Schumacher, the racing driver.
Yeah.
This is a man who is idolised and fated as a hero, as a god. He must be absolutely crazy to do something, as some would say, as inane as drive round in a circle so fast as to be dangerous. Where is the definition?
Yeah.
This man is psychotic. Why isn't he locked up? Instead he's fated as a god. Where are we going to start on the...
on the F1, yeah.
Who wants to go and climb a mountain? There's nothing at the top.
It used to take two doctors to section a person.
It still does.
Does it still take?
Yeah, yeah. Just on that, though, to sort of interject on that, there was a proposal at the time of swine flu. When swine flu was being... well, yeah, that's probably another story as well, isn't it? I'm in the right place to talk about swine flu. When that was being pushed like crazy, there was a little piece of legislation that didn't get through Parliament, but it was proposed. And that was because of swine flu and the fact that doctors may get swine flu, There may not be enough doctors, in your point, for 2 to section somebody. The proposal was put to Parliament that it would just take 1. Because of swine flu, which is manufactured anyway. Or am I out of turn there? No, I'm okay.
He knows you're all crooks, but he doesn't quite know how it works.
They're dumbed down sheep.
Maybe this is a point of, I look at myself as being a bit of a messenger wherever I go, whether I'm on telly, whether I'm on the radio or newspapers, or talking here. Sorry?
That's what we do.
Right, you're messengers. You are telling other people what is going on. If they still decide to go down a route that doesn't, not conform, that doesn't agree with what you've said, you have at least been the messenger. You have informed them. If they are fully informed, and it's like this, it's with psychiatry. If a person is fully informed and they still choose psychiatry, okay. I'm not here to stop them. I'm here to inform. And if I can inform people that, psychiatry ain't what it's made out to be, and, okay, I'm talking to people here who know. You've already, questioned a lot of things, which is fantastic. But, look at how many people there are in Bournemouth and look how many people there are here. That's not enough people questioning what's going on. So, but it's fantastic that there is you. From acorns come oak trees. Yeah.
It's taken a long time for this oak tree to grow, I can tell you.
I'll give it a bit of water. Are we... Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's go on to the next bit. The next question I just want to pose is, what are the ethical considerations of psychiatrists and drug companies, so put the two together, being heavily involved in marketing campaigns? Now, you've got to understand that, in order for them to be so well known, there's a lot of money thrown into marketing. Tremendous amount. Now, in this country, we don't have direct-to-consumer marketing. In America, they do. You can promote, or you can actually go and show Prozac on the telly. Hey, if you're feeling depressed, go and get your Prozac. We don't get that, fortunately, here. But they do in America. Well, okay. The psychiatrists are at the forefront of that marketing campaign because they are working with the pharmaceutical companies to put together these marketing strategies. Because you've got to have, if the psychiatrist comes up with a, voted in, internet addiction disorder, okay, yeah, somebody's got that, and then the pharmaceutical companies over here, they say, well, we've got this new chemical over here, this one we've just made in our laboratory, yeah, it's really great, and we think it'll probably, it'll, internet addiction. Okay, let's put two together, market it. First of all, you've got to say...
Yeah, I was just going to say, have you heard of the new drug that I did hear being advertised on the radio and whatnot, and that they're going to give to obese mothers so that they can have smaller children?
Yeah.
Well, how many women would love to give birth to, easily? They're all going to say that, aren't they?
I'm not going to even speak or even suggest that I understand that. It's like, I get your point, but obviously that's something very, personal to the female population. But, if they feel that they do want to have, make it easier, okay, and they'll go for it.
Tested though.
On the first 500,000 customers.
They're trying to hurt the fetus. They're trying to control the supply and hurting the fetuses so that they come out dumbed down. That's my opinion.
Good point.
Can I add one other point to what you say about the pharmaceutical giants and the psychiatrists? They operate with tacit, how can I say, forwarding of money from the banks.
Mm-hmm.
When there's money to be made, the banks are in there funding it all in the bank.
Okay.
So you can't discount their...
No, I'm certainly going to take your word for that. I follow the money trail to the shareholders who represent the drug companies, and obviously the psychiatrists who are coming up with disorders. Without the disorder, the drug doesn't get prescribed.
The funding has to come from the banks.
Of course. Point taken. Now, whilst there's the marketing campaigns, there's also this other thing called screening. Is screening real? Do you know what screening is?
What percentage of people know that a pharmaceutical rep can go into any GP surgery in the country and talk to the GP, request so many of his patients to be put on a medical drug for research purposes. The GP is handsomely paid. The patients have no knowledge that they're a guinea pig, and if anything happens to them, that they're damaged by the drug, it's hidden under another farcical diagnosis of another condition. It also got access to the consultants who can equally go into the rep can go into a consultant in hospital and put his patients on medical drugs.
Okay.
And use them as guinea pigs without their knowledge.
All right.
And this is what I and many other people have been trying to get government to stop this abuse.
Well, okay, I know, I got that. Let me... Okay, you've got a passionate point on your hands, and I'm going to take that up with you afterwards, if that's all right with you. I just wanted to... I want to just... that point of screening. Screening is where somebody gets a questionnaire. You get a questionnaire, how are you feeling today? Have you felt up or down in the last 6 months? Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah?
Because I won't take any medication from my doctor.
Oh, yeah.
So they gave me that form to fill in.
Ah.
Refused.
Okay.
Take.
All right. So there's a screening questionnaire going on, even if you don't take it.
Yeah.
But there's a screening going on for adults now. There's also screening going on in schools for kids,
Children, yeah.
right, to find out if they have a mental disorder of some kind. It's a questionnaire. That's all it is. And by the questions, there is a deduction made. And again, we're talking about opinion. Now, statistics. Here's an interesting statistic for you with regards to screening. More than a quarter of those screened later started taking antidepressants. That's later. More than a quarter. That's a pretty radical statistic when you think that, how many people are really going to be ill by taking a questionnaire. Now, it's hard to see screening as anything more, and I know you'll agree with me on this. It's nothing more than a spectacular marketing campaign. It's spectacular. It's fantastic. All the superlatives. It's brilliant. Because what they're doing is, it's the opportunity for the pharmaceutical companies to say, yes, you're real, let's make some money. Oh yeah, and here's an interesting point. You ever heard of false positives? It's where somebody, I'm just going to give you a quick definition on that. A false positive. It's where a result that is erroneously positive, so in other words, it's an error if it's positive, when the condition it is testing for does not actually exist. Okay, so you're testing for a condition that doesn't actually exist, but you get a positive to say, yes, it does. That's a false positive. And what happens is, this marketing and its wide diagnostic net create a huge rate of these false positives. So, you're a loser. If you get diagnosed, well, you know what's coming up. You saw in there someone called David Schaffer, a guy there who was saying, he was the founder of something called Teen Screen in America. And he actually operated over here in the United Kingdom. And he came up with Teen Screen. In other words, screen the teens. Let's find out what's wrong with them and let's get them labelled. And that's what was going on in the United States. And it's coming here. It's called early intervention screening going on in the United Kingdom.
There was a case which actually developed locally from Poole.
Oh, yeah.
It was a young girl, she was about 5, and she was told, her parents were told that she had been diagnosed at school, and they deemed that she had some kind of disorder. It did actually make it into the national papers. About 2 or 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So they're already at it again.
Well spotted.
What rights have the parents got to deny treatment?
Well, that's another point. It's a very good point. Because what happens if a parent does? I'm actually going to just tell you, well, there's all sorts goes on. There was a lady in America, and again, it all happens in America. I don't mean to say that because, it doesn't happen in England, but it's like the extremes happen in America. A lady, she said, no, I'm not going to give my kid drugs that you've told me to because of blah, 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 blah. Medical neglect was thrown at her, and the SWAT team turned up. Yeah. It's like, whoa.
I was forcibly given a depot injection, which is a slow-release capsule
Yep.
on the butt cheek for refusing to take the tablets.
Were you under section? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, they can do it, can't they?
Yeah, they can, yeah.
Because that's the way it is.
I was sectioned, by the way, for getting burgled. And the police took me back to the police station and comforted me. They left me in a room. And I ended up trying to get their attention. And they sectioned me from there.
Okay.
Unbelievable.
I was going to say, that's very bold of you to tell us, and thank you. I mean, that's not an easy thing to say in front of a crowd, but I appreciate it. Okay.
Yeah, but he had a disease, he was a victim.
I like your style.
Can I get back to your what you were saying about the false positives?
Yeah.
Many of the questionnaires, these tick box questionnaires.
That's, well, all of them.
Yeah. Can I expand a little bit on that?
Go ahead.
I'm not going to get into the details of my beating. Basically, I was asked to sign consent forms that would allow the powers that be to access my friends and family, quite ask them questions. Now, what the idea behind it is that they ask your family member, your mother, your father, your sister, or brother, does little Johnny, or has little Johnny ever acted strangely or in an odd manner? Now, who in the world could not say, well, you know,
he's little
yes,
Johnny.
He has. Little Johnny has acted strangely. The key is, there's key questions. Say there's 20 questions and all. There's 3 killer questions in there. And all the shrinks want is the person to say yes to those 3. They then remove that into our report, a statistical report, and they say that even your own family have said you have acted strangely.
Yes.
That's how they turn it inside out, they section it.
Yeah.
And then they come to you, the person, and they say to the person, your parents even said that.
Yeah.
It's so duplicitous. It's very dangerous. But that's the trick. And the
Okay. Let me show you the third bit. I just want to check something. How am I doing on time? I have absolutely no idea because I'm enjoying myself so much. Am I all right?
We can stay here till 10 o'clock.
Let's see who stays. Let's see who sees it out.
10 to 9 actually.
I just had a question.
Yes, Oliver.
You know you said about the screen.
Mm.
I was wondering if when I get to secondary school you said it's teen screening.
Yeah.
How would I be able to recognise that it's happening to me right there, right now?
Well, there's 2 things. One, I'd make sure that your dad knows about anything like that. In other words, are you being asked to fill out a questionnaire? Also, take a look at what you are being asked to do. Because sometimes they'll try to ask a child not to tell the parents. And that is going on in Australia right now. Yeah. In Australia, there is a little bit of legislation they're attempting to push it through, whereby a child can be treated psychiatrically without having to tell the parents, and that's from 12 years old and onwards. I think that's disgraceful. But
they are doing it. They are doing it. They're setting children on boards.
That's right.
They're being
That's right.
parents. They are doing it.
yeah. So in terms, that's a great question, Oliver, is to make sure that Dad knows. And Dad can also, we've been piloting something called a parental exemption form, which says that the parent signs it, gives it to the school, and says, I hereby, he's saying that you will not treat my child psychiatrically. See what they do. What are they going to do? Defy your dad? They're going to have somebody on their hands then. Let me just play the third bit so that there's a hand up there. Yes.
Why is it the psychiatrists are allowed to do all this when there's no scientific evidence to prove what they're doing? Surely by government law, they're not allowed to do any of this without scientific proof.
It's because it's in law. Oh. Because it currently is a law. It says that, it's lawful to label somebody. Well, yeah, I say lawful. It's in medicine, and I use the term loosely. If you're going up and down, manically, then you've got bipolar disorder. If you've got bipolar disorder, then you need drugs. If you don't take your drugs and you're a danger to somebody else or, yourself, you'll get sectioned under the Mental Health Act.
Without scientific proof?
Oh, absolutely.
They have more power than doctors, don't they, psychiatrists?
point
Well, they have more power than police.
The point is, it's a very convenient tool which the judiciary can use.
Yes.
Well, as it said there, it's used in courts. You know, let's have a psychiatric report. My colleague, Sue back there, she was saying earlier today on the way down that how often do you see, you read a newspaper report and you get to the bottom and it says, oh, the judge called for psychiatric reports. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but what did he do? Oh, well, he rammed his car into a shop or something like that. Why do you need a psychiatric report? Why not just put him in jail?
Yeah, exactly.
Didn't he commit a crime?
Are you crazy?
Oh, reserve judgment. Number 3, here we go.
Not allowed to scandalise the judiciary either.
Oh!
Just in case they fall for their whole process, yeah.
Oh. Pardon me.
Writing or telephone. Put back.
Okay, excuse me one moment.
Oh, you're there.
Let that go away. Okay. Okay.
Billions are spent every year by drug companies to advertise their latest drug. These efforts are obvious. But are there hidden ways that psychiatrists and drug companies can get you to ask your doctor without your even knowing it? It might seem impossible that an appetite for psychotropic drugs could be created without one's even being aware of it. Could this possibly be true? Well, if you know what to look for, you will find drug marketing campaigns practically everywhere. In hospitals, programs promoting psychotropics air over closed-circuit television networks like the Patient Channel. You can find them in children's books such as Brandon and the Bipolar Bear, where a boy that his feelings are caused by chemicals in his brain that can be controlled with good medicine. There are mental health awareness programs touring college campuses to promote mental health checkups. Another hidden promotion lured high school girls to a conference on eating disorders to pitch them Zoloft. Where do these campaigns come from? Many of them come from industry-funded front groups operated by psychiatrists but posing as compassionate patient support groups.
A group that's focused on people who get depressed, or these support groups. Those are all also funded by and driven by a large part of the drug companies.
The fact that they're being highly funded by the drug companies puts into question, the information that they're providing.
In fact, a recent global survey estimates that 2/3 of all patient advocacy groups depend on drug companies or device manufacturers for at least some of their income. Through media interviews, public service announcements, and promotional events, psychiatric front groups preach the message that at least 1/4 of everyone on Earth is mentally ill. You could be too, and there is nothing you can do about it, short of taking psychotropics for the rest of your life. And of all the programs they use to get people onto these drugs, one of the most successful is the benevolent-sounding mental health screening campaign. But it all begins with psychiatrists and their very broad DSM-based screening questionnaires that cover common life situations such as sadness, nervousness, and occasional loneliness.
Because the symptoms are so subjective and the way they decide and describe it, everybody's got depression. So then they started targeting the kids and doing this at schools, and they implemented it through the school process of coming to the schools and having depression screening days.
People would come in and they'd fill out these questionnaires and, oh yeah, you've got it. Brought in quite a few new customers.
But with statistics proving that more than 1/4 of those screened at thousands of screening sites later start taking antidepressants, it's hard to see screening as anything other than a spectacular marketing opportunity. One such front group, Screening for Mental Health Incorporated, sponsors national campaigns such as National Depression Screening Day, which uses simple quizzes to screen people for mental illness. But what is not revealed is that screening for mental health has taken in a total of almost $5 million from at least 7 different drug companies, all makers of psychotropic drugs given to children. Of all demographics, these mental health screening companies especially target teenagers. TeenScreen is the biggest such screening program in the world, a U.S. national program targeting high school students under the guise of suicide prevention. TeenScreen was developed by Dr. David Schaffer, a psychiatrist with heavy ties to the drug industry.
TeenScreen is a series of questions that take about 10 minutes for kids to answer. It's targeted at high school kids. On the TeenScreen case, it asks, do you sometimes feel like other people have an easier life, or, do sometimes you feel bad about yourself and other times you feel good about yourself? Well, given where you are in that particular day and what's happened, you're going to answer that differently.
Once this test comes back that the child answered it based on how his emotions were at that very moment, that information gets passed back to the school, possibly the guidance counselor, adjustment counselor, or the school counselor herself, and the child is then referred on to mental health agency.
And studies now show that once in front of a psychiatrist, 9 out of 10 children are prescribed a psychotropic drug. Using alarming language and misleading statistics, TeenScreen attempts to frighten parents, fearful that their child may be suicidal. But a closer look reveals that this is not a suicide prevention program at all, but a drug marketing campaign. And this marketing and its wide diagnostic net creates a huge rate of what are known as false positives. By Schaffer's own admission, 84% of all students taking the TeenScreen test were falsely labeled as depressed or suicidal. Predictably, TeenScreen is viewed with suspicion by many parents. To get around this, TeenScreen personnel have offered school children such enticements as movie coupons or free pizza to motivate them to get their parents' signature on the consent form. To eliminate parental objection altogether, TeenScreen has even instituted a passive consent policy, whereby if the parent does not formally object in writing, the child is assumed to have gotten permission and is then screened.
Typically, the permission slip that comes home is a permission slip that if you don't sign it, they will give the children the screening anyway.
And for many who do complete the screening questionnaire, the results can be devastating. In Colorado, TeenScreen labeled over half of all school children as at risk for suicide, in spite of a government-documented teen suicide rate of less than 1 in 10,000. Far fewer odds than being struck. To get around this, TeenScreen personnel have offered school children such enticements as movie coupons or free pizza to motivate them to get their parents' signature on the consent form. To eliminate parental objection altogether, TeenScreen has even instituted a passive consent policy, whereby if the parent does not formally object in writing, the child is assumed to have gotten permission and is then screened.
Typically,
far from preventing suicide, screening programs actually cause it. The chair of the National Institute of Mental Health Research Consortium concluded, participants were more likely to consider suicide a solution to a problem after the program than before the program. And research has shown that once put on psychotropic drugs, children are more likely not just to consider suicide, but to actually follow through.
That you may have more people that are so distraught by the way they are when they're under the influence of the drug that they do commit suicide. And I think it's entirely possible that they're not, instead of saving lives, they're going to be losing lives to suicide.
With no evidence of effectiveness on one hand and a huge downside on the other, TeenScreen is still being run in 43 states at over 5 million sites. But it is not the only screening program aimed at children. The Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System administers a 35-minute test in at least 45 states. Yet another, Signs of Suicide Incorporated, has screened thousands of children at 3,500 schools across the United States. They too are heavily backed by pharmaceutical money. And so far, for psychiatrists and drug companies, it has been a great investment.
throwing out the net and doing a typical TeenScreen or any screen for mass assessment we now have increased our client population tenfold by kids who need to be either seen by a therapist and or seen by a psychiatrist.
The internet is another rich source of new prospects. Take, for example, the Patient Health Questionnaire, a 16-item checklist that allows anyone to diagnose himself with depression within 8 minutes. One of the questionnaires developers was psychiatrist Dr. Robert Spitzer, the architect of DSM-3, and its copyright is owned by Pfizer, the world's largest pharmaceutical company, and maker of the antidepressant Zoloft. There is also a 2-question version that can take less than a minute to advise you to ask your doctor. Online screening questionnaires abound, testing such potential psychiatric disease categories as bipolar disorder, ADHD, narcissism, self-esteem problems, eating disorders, and sex addiction.
We all have ups and downs because that's what normal life is. If you administer the screening on those times where you have down, you're going to be labeled as having a mental health issue. Or if you took the same screening later, you may not be, but you've already been labeled that way. And that's the danger of that.
And labels last a lifetime. So far, screening campaigns have been limited to those willing to participate. But what if the screenings are no longer voluntary? Will this lead to increased drugging?
Spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down.
Oh yeah.
In the most
Yeah.
delightful way.
Okay. Yeah.
Be happy then.
So, you know, it's screening. Has anybody actually seen one of these, or even been and taken up one of these things? Seen them on the internet?
I'll tell you one thing.
Yeah.
I've been going to the same dentist for nearly 19 years,
Yeah.
and I've just received a form to fill in, and it's all silly questions like what's coming up.
Is it really a dentist?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I haven't filled it in yet.
Good for you. Yeah, don't. See what happens if you don't.
Well, I don't know. I'm
See if
going
the
to
SWAT-
find out because I should be going back to this dentist
See if
in
the
a
SWAT
couple of weeks'
team-
time with a blank form.
I have a question here. Direct-to-consumer advertising. What do you think? What do you? I know somebody earlier said, "Yeah, it's coming." Is that going to happen here?
Yes.
Is there money in it?
Well, absolutely. There's billions.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. What could you do about it?
Become a lobbyist, make lots of money.
Well, okay. But what could you do realistically, you know, from a viewpoint of a gentleman who's a free thinker?
I'd say those that stop it.
Try and make people aware.
Good. Yeah. You know, we're talking about informing people. And, you know, again, that's what you're doing, that's what I'm doing. And if you can actually bring that about, then you're doing a lot of people a big service. Whether they think you are or not isn't the point. You know underneath it all, when there's something ain't right, you know it ain't right. And that's the important point.
But the problem with TV is they have to put all the side effects on the screen.
That's right. Well, they've got to. That's another question, that is, isn't it? Side effects. It's informed consent. If you were actually truly given all of the, you would be informed if you were told everything about a drug, but you're not told. Oliver.
I know sometimes on adverts they have for makeup, and they have to put the ingredients in tiny weeny words at the bottom. And I know sometimes with the adverts for loans, sometimes they put things like that, really small writing. You have to really have a really close look to even see what it says.
That's right. Well, somebody the other day asked me about what are you going to do if somebody calls you up and says, you know, I'm really in a desperate state. What do I do? What I do is I tend to find out, are they on a particular medication? And if they are, I ask them if they've actually read the patient information leaflet. Not normally. No. And they're wondering why they feel a certain way. And I said, well, you know, depending on what it is, whatever they've told me and whatever they're taking, I say, well, do have a look at the patient information leaflet, because a lot of the effects are paradoxical.
I can remember going to the
pharmacist section in Bournemouth Hospital. I can't remember what the condition is. I think it was something to do with my eye, I think it was. But when we went to pick up the prescription, they were actually taking the data sheet out of the packet and just throwing it in the bin.
Wow.
And I stopped and asked and said, you know, I want that information. We did report it to our MP, but that was a waste of time. But that clip you just showed reminded me of the situation back in Regent in South Wales. I think the latest number of youngsters being teenagers committing suicide in Regent. I think the number is up about 47 now.
Has it continued after the big media coverage?
I think the media stopped announcing the figures around about 12, 13. But since then, it's crept up to about 47, 48.
That's very interesting.
And it makes you think whether it's all linked in with this business of screening, medication, and what have you.
It's a very good point.
But it's the whole health system has got to a point now where it treats the symptoms and not the cause. And treating the symptoms, there's profit in that. Gentleman across the way said, well, how the hell does these pharmaceutical companies get away with this? But if you have a look at the system, out in America, you've got people who worked for the pharmaceutical companies now in government. They're actually physically moved across. So any bill that goes through Parliament, they're voting on it. The same applies in this country. You know, pharmaceutical companies have got a very big interest, and the thing about pharmaceutical companies, well, they do employ a lot of people in this country. And the other thing, which I've always made a little comment about, is that we put doctors on pedestals and they put us on a pill.
Good point.
And that's what's happening. You know, you go outside these four walls here, and the majority of people think that doctors are wonderful. I can remember going down to sign on with a dentist when we first moved down to south of England. Well, we had form to fill in. They were allergic to anything.
Yes.
And I wrote in the answer column there, doctors.
Just on that point, I would certainly say that doctors have a very, very important role to play. And the ones who are dealing with medical conditions, real pathology, good. But again, it's psychiatrists. They're not dealing with real illnesses.
Figures, but government figures announce that 60% of people admitted into a hospital these days are suffering from the side effects of medication.
Okay.
Well, aside of the defence systems, the NHS must have the biggest multi-billion pound fund going. Defence, probably number one. The NHS, number two. It is a big pot and everybody's grabbing the money.
Right. It's only because the average taxpayer gives them the money, else they wouldn't have it.
What the gentleman touched on there is the esteem in which doctors are held. A friend of mine, I actually twisted her arm and dragged her off to a homeopath, naturopath, and I pushed her into an acupuncturist.
Okay.
Both of whom are having the desired effects. She's still under the doctor for various things, and every time, do not mention this to the doctor, what you are doing.
Right.
Do not. That's right. Because the first thing the doctors do, right, you've got to stop all this now, or I won't treat you.
Okay.
Stop it today, come back in 2 to 3 weeks' time when all the effects are gone, then I'll start you on another drug and we'll monitor that. And to try and get that that mindset, do not tell the doctor anything. You know, it's one of the hardest things, the rows that we've had.
Yeah. Okay. No, good points.
The impression I get is that the doctors are not able to treat a whole pile of health conditions. They haven't got a clue how to deal with it. All they can do is prescribe a drug which addresses the symptom, and the symptoms are obviously reflex a cause which they're never able to establish. So it's only people like naturopaths or somebody like that who've got alternative methods and methods for diagnosis of what their causes are, who have a chance of getting the patient back to normal health.
Right.
That takes weeks,
months. Yeah.
If these psychiatric drugs actually cured people, then they'd be in the business of putting themselves out of business.
Took the words right out of my mouth.
They don't want you.
Absolutely. If they cured anyone, they'd be out of business.
If they cured anyone, they'd be in the business themselves out of business.
Stopping wars. They want you ill.
That's right.
And keep you ill.
You
That's
will
right.
find this comment very interesting. A lady who was on HRT for quite some time was suffering the emotional of psychiatric problems. She was constantly going back and forth to her doctor, and it was quite obvious he was totally ignoring her problem. It was all in her mind. So he asked her then, would she help him to assist her in test? She was so angry and furious when he asked her for a water test. So she went down a local farm where she used to go and help out, and she filled the bottle of the water from the horse. She took it back to the surgery, to the hospital, not the surgery, to the hospital, and she had a letter back to say, your protein levels are excellent. There's nothing wrong with your water work. It's all in your mind. That's a true story which I've told you, and I could tell you many, many more. Patients are beginning to play tricks on doctors because they're losing their confidence. They don't listen to them.
Thank you very much.
Patient.
Can I just say, I'm so glad I came tonight, and I know you're only halfway through, but I'm actually feeling very, very scared, because it's making me think about the witch hunts they had. Somebody accused you of being a witch, and it was all over. So what if you upset a policeman, for example, and he arrests you, takes you down, she's shouting her mouth off, get the psychiatrist or somebody else. That's the end of me, I'm sitting doing something.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really, really frightening.
I can appreciate your point. I think if you're, and here comes the point, informed. If you're informed, let's say, me and my colleagues here, we get calls from people who are actually they're just about to go in under, to get ECT. Or there's something just about, what do you call it, the crisis team are just about to turn up on their doorstep. And they're going, what do we do? So they say, well, give them our number. And then, or they're not going to call us, but we call them. And we call them. And we say, what's the deal? What's the problem? We're not nasty about it or anything. It's just like, well, what's going on? What is it that the particular lady who called us, what's the problem? And, but if you're informed, hopefully you'll be a bit more informed after tonight. You're armed with information. Knowledge is power. If you are, whatever you know, if you know something, you can't be the adverse effect of it.
I know mine for the last few years. I haven't been to my GP for nearly 5 years now. I don't trust anything that he says or any drugs that he'll give me. So I'm quite aware of the illusion. But just listening tonight, I'm thinking, that could happen tomorrow, and I'm sitting in some psychiatric hospital in my head and some drug, and that's me for the rest of my life. That's really, I'm not going to go around and completely ignore police. So it's not.
Of course not. Of course not.
I'm just hoping you'll get the medical cure at the end.
There's two more bits, and the end bit is what you can do.
Yeah.
What you do is you give them that DVD.
Thank you. The question I'd like to take up now is what obligations, so what does a psychiatrist have to do, and indeed a medical doctor, to ensure that they fully inform people about the potential dangers of the drugs that they are prescribing? What are their obligations to do that? Do they? That's the point. And it's a tough one, this, because imagine, many of you are parents here. I guess you are parents, and I know some of you, at least one who's had a loss. It's a tough time. Imagine being a parent who's told that your 7-year-old son or daughter is very ill and suffering. They're suffering so badly and they're so ill that they need medication to be able to learn, even to survive. Now this is going on. You're told not to worry. Don't worry, it'll be fine. Now, they could even say millions of other children are taking it. What's the problem? Give your son or daughter a chance. That's the sort of thing that you're getting, these parents are getting told. Now imagine being told that unless you administer the drug to your child, he or she could be removed from your home.
That's right.
Because to deny the medication, to deny this psychotropic mind-altering drug, would constitute emotional and medical neglect.
That's right.
Under such advice, you agree to the medication. You agree to giving your child a mind-altering drug. Now imagine, and this is the tough bit, now imagine hearing the news that your son or daughter just died suddenly and inexplicably. No reason. A coroner tells you that the experts that you trusted lied. They simply told you an untruth. They didn't tell you what was really going on. The medication is the cause of your child's death. This scenario, let's face it, it's common, where psychostimulants, well, we're talking about psychostimulants particularly here, but I know there's other drug categories as well. But specifically with children who are being told they have emotional, behavioural difficulties, they can't learn, they're being given psychostimulants. So the scenario is common where psychostimulants are prescribed to millions of children. And as I say, the picture is similar with other classifications of drugs. This chapter examines the truth about those drugs and what they are and what they do. And it's important that you know this one, because if you know what they are and what they do, you're informed. Here's the deal. If you're fully informed and you know what's going on, even if it's not you, you can tell someone else. And if you can tell someone else, they can tell someone else, and you can actually stop this happening. Here's the next bit.
If drugs are being sold as safe and effective by psychiatrists and drug companies, why is it that we are seeing an alarming increase in consumer-reported adverse side effects? What are psychiatrists not telling us? All drugs create biological changes in the human body. In mainstream medicine, those changes that are intended are called main effects. Those that aren't are called side effects. No drug is without effects, side or otherwise. But with psychiatric drugs targeting delicate brain processes, all effects, even main effects, can be hazardous, unpredictable, and sometimes irreversible.
And all these medications that are apparently supposed to be act as a magic pill, they're finding that all of them have side effects that could put the patient in harm's way just as well as it can help them.
So, just what are these drugs doing, and how do they work? To find out, you should be able to locate much of this information in the drug's package insert, or PI. Contained in this insert is the mechanism of action, the drug maker's explanation for how the drug works on the body. Take, for example, antibiotics, drugs used for over 50 years as a cure for infectious diseases such as tetanus, tuberculosis, and strep throat. Its mechanism of action is well known. Antibiotics prevent the cellular activity of bacteria, thus inhibiting its growth or killing it altogether. But with psychotropics, drug makers say on their own package insert that their mechanism of action is unknown.
Most of the medications that are given to clients, whether they're SSRI medications or they're antipsychotics, a lot of the pharmacology of these medications, they don't even know how they work in the first place.
But it has been noted that there is one primary side effect of psychotropics that is common to all.
Most medication and psychotropic medication, I've noticed, tends to frighten things, so that while you're decreasing the depression, you're also decreasing the joy. And so you're minimizing what it means to a human in the service of avoiding dealing with the problem.
They can't connect to the world around them. They feel like there's no feeling, which is, you should have some feeling there.
All that's doing is really numbing them down, and they're not doing the work that they need to do to resolve an issue that's going on somewhere internally.
But the numbing of emotions is not the only way psychotropic drugs affect the user. Each of the 5 main classes of psychotropics has side effects of its own. Typical antipsychotics, such as thorazine, are powerful chemicals originally designed to shut down the central nervous systems of mental hospital inmates. They are now mainly used on people with serious mental problems, and they can cause feelings of helplessness, deterioration of the mind, neurological damage, dementia, trembling, twitching, and damage to internal organs, to name a few. Anti-anxiety drugs such as Valium and Xanax are prescribed for nervousness, anxiety, and panic disorders. They can cause patients dissociation, cognitive impairment, increased aggression, fatigue, hallucination, and acute amnesia.
They've got foggy thinking. They're bloated. They have weight gain. They're now diabetic. It's one symptom after another, all caused from the drugs that they're taking, and they don't realize it.
Stimulant drugs like Ritalin, Adderall, and Concerta are mainly used for people with so-called attention problems, such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. These drugs are very addictive and can result in stunted growth, weight loss, manic behavior, heart palpitations, neurological tics, cardiac arrhythmia, gross brain shrinkage and malfunction, anxiety, insomnia, violent behavior, and even sudden death. Ritalin, a stimulant commonly prescribed to children, acts on the body in a very similar way to cocaine, but is far more potent. And recent studies show that it can cause permanent changes in children's developing brains.
So you're going to have problems, and it is shown that some of these medications, particularly the stimulants that they're giving, like Ritalin, Concerta, all the ADHD medications actually shrink brain tissue.
They know that these psychiatric drugs destroy cells, destroy brain cells, shrink brain tissue. How can that possibly ever benefit anyone? It can't. That's the simplicity. It's not possible.
Antidepressants are a 4th class of psychotropic drug. As their name suggests, they are used to treat depression and mood disorders. The list of side effects includes blurred vision, dry mouth, low blood pressure, internal bleeding, weight gain, sleep disturbance, seizures, impaired cardiac function, and psychosis.
The most common that I see is the sexual dysfunction. So women having a hard time reaching orgasm or just finding that their libido is lower. And I see that with men as well. And the second most common thing I see is weight gain. I have to say it is not terribly uncommon to see a 40-pound weight gain with antidepressants.
One study found that Paxil, a leading antidepressant, increases the risk of breast cancer in women by 7 times. Perhaps riskiest of all is the drugging of pregnant or postnatal women with antidepressants for depression.
When the mother takes the drugs, the psychiatric drugs, or any type of drug in that, like an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety or an antipsychotic drug, that's going to affect the baby as well as the mother, not just the mom, because the baby's going to get it straight through the umbilical cord, through the bloodstream.
The drugging of pregnant women has led to a 20 to 30% hazard of preterm birth, brain damage, and lower fetal age at delivery, and nearly triples the risk of severe birth defects.
And the antidepressants have been shown to cause something called PPHN, which is a heart problem in newborns. And I think it's criminal to be giving medications to women knowing that the babies are going to be at risk.
My mom takes Paxil. She can have a baby born with sometimes the limbs are missing. It's called limb reduction. They can have cleft lip. They can have serious heart defects, missing chambers, or the arteries in the wrong place, and also can be born with the organs growing outside of the body.
And these are just a few of the many, many side effects of psychotropic drugs. Among the top 3 best-selling antidepressant drugs, called SSRIs, there are 1,817 possible side effects associated with Prozac, 2,194 with Zoloft, and 2,497 with Paxil. Interestingly, among these is the worsening of the exact same symptoms the drugs claim to address.
They cause depression. They cause suicidal tendencies and ideologies. So they cause a lot of the very exact symptoms that they're supposed to be correcting.
They're being treated for depression with a product that's going to create depression. They're treating for a psychosis with something that's actually going to create or has the potential of creating a psychosis.
Atypical antipsychotics, one of the newest classes of psychotropic drugs, are used mainly on adults and children diagnosed with bipolar disorder. They are also known as mood stabilizers. Though launched with storied claims as miracle drugs with little or no side effects, atypical antipsychotics have recently been exposed as creating severe weight gain, diabetes, coronary heart disease, acutely irregular muscle movement, pancreatitis, and delirium. Though the new antipsychotics were originally approved only to treat schizophrenic adults, over a 7-year period, prescriptions for children jumped 5-fold to an estimated 2.5 million prescriptions. And this drugging is coming with serious consequences.
You know, I've seen kids who have had significant weight gain on some of the antipsychotics, where they were pre-diabetic. You know, they've had changes in some of their cardiovascular functioning. So there are potentials to really damage the child's health.
When you get drugs that you're giving to kids that we know cause extreme weight gain and attack the liver, attack the kidney, that have long-term results, these children that we're giving them today, this medication, we may be doing, kidney dialysis for in 10, 15 years.
And it is not only children that can be affected. It has been estimated that psychotropic drugs are to blame for over 16,000 traffic accidents every year in the United States. And this study only looked at drivers 65 and older. And what happens when these unwanted side effects surface? Usually, the psychiatrist will prescribe yet another drug.
It's called polypharmacy. It's just, adding additional, the first drug doesn't work, you add a second drug. If you have an adverse side effect from a drug, then you add another drug to deal with the adverse side effect.
And then let's say they start an antidepressant and now they can't sleep. So in order to counteract that, they'll be given a sleeping pill. Then a tolerance builds up. So they might now need another drug because they're now at a tolerance level of the first drug that it's no longer creating the, quote, expected or helpful result.
It's not uncommon to see people 5, 6, 8, 9, psychotropic drugs. And there's absolutely not a shred of research that supports that these drugs can be used safely and effectively in combination.
Consider tardive dyskinesia, a movement disorder entirely caused by psychotropic drugs. For 20 years, beginning in the 50s, psychiatrists failed to inform patients about the link between tardive dyskinesia and antipsychotics, such as Thorazine and Haldol. By the time psychiatrists admitted the truth about their pills, thousands had been permanently crippled. Even today, tardive dyskinesia has developed in 73,000 older adults, and drug-induced Parkinsonism has appeared in 61,000 more. But this class of psychotropics is far from the exception. Reports are now surfacing that today's atypical antipsychotics and antidepressants, such as Zoloft, are causing widespread tardive dyskinesia, sometimes within months of first use. But psychiatrists and drug companies continue to dispute this damning new evidence and go on prescribing these drugs, even to children. But of all the side effects experienced by users of psychotropic drugs, the most horrendous may be an intense inner agitation and restlessness, known as akathisia.
These drugs can cause something called akathisia, which causes people to become very agitated, and actually a little nuts, a little off balance, and they'll do things that they never would have done before. Things are totally out of character.
This is a normal person without any history of auditory hallucinations, and all of a sudden they'll say there's voices telling them this is the only way to stop the pain, it's the only way is to kill themselves.
I have patients tell me that they never, ever, ever had one single thought about suicide in their entire life until they started on the drug.
An estimated 10 to 25% of SSRI antidepressant users, close to 7 million people in the U.S., experience akathisia. And Psychiatry's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental disorders even admits the connection between psychotropic drugs, akathisia, and suicide. The statistics back this up. The suicide rate of the general population is less than 11 for every 100,000. But for every 100,000 people taking SSRIs, the suicide rate jumps to 718, over 65 times more. And yet, we are told daily by psychiatrists and drug companies that psychotropic drugs actually prevent suicide. So, what are we to believe? One can start with the drug company's own warning letters to doctors, or unpublished data for the antidepressant Effexor, or an analysis of Prozac using the FDA's own statistics, or even a British House of Commons report on Zyprexa. Of course, not everyone commits suicide, but the huge volume of other side effects can be horrendous.
The medication that the psychiatrist prescribed me made me feel awful. Constant headaches, constant nausea, wanting my skin to turn inside out, just feeling like bugs were crawling all over me all the time.
It made me feel like all slow and like sluggish and stuff. Like when somebody would ask me something, it would kind of like take a minute, like, what?
These drugs have affected my heart. They have affected my liver. Weight gain one time, hit like 40 pounds.
These thoughts come over me like I wanted to kill someone. I wanted to really hurt somebody.
It just sucks all the life out of it. It's bigger than a body, like a machine.
I didn't want to live. I didn't have the desire to live. I felt miserable.
You just can't live, you know, you'd just rather die. Because there's no living when you're hallucinating every day.
I actually tried to commit suicide with my psych meds.
At some point when you realize that you are really just existing, not living. At some point you realize you need to take the risk to get off.
But what about those who say psychotropic drugs really did make them feel better? That for them, these are life-saving medications whose benefits exceed their risks. Are psychotropics actually safe and effective for them?
So what ends up happening is that someone feels good for a while, and then very often they have to have their dose increased, and then they feel good for a while, and then they might have to have it increased again, and maybe they'll switch agents. So it's that kind of a story if you're not actually getting to the root of what's going on.
I think the research is pretty clear that then often starts to change, and you start to have a super sensitivity to being depressed, in which case then you become more depressed, and then they're chronically depressed.
And there is ample evidence that if the short-term side effects of psychotropics don't get you, the long-term effects will.
Psychiatric drugs are toxic to the body. They do build up in the body and add to the body's reserve and reservoir of toxins that will suppress the immune system, and the body will try and fight them as foreign objects.
If they're on these medications for years and years and years, I mean, one of the things that we know about adults and some of the, for bipolar and schizophrenia is that they're dying at younger ages. And these are adults. So if we're starting this medication approach with young kids, what is their life expectancy going to be?
No one's really examined it or is looking at the big picture, which is what does it really do to a society with a proliferation of mood-altering, emotion-altering, or blunting in a society at large.
And I think we're going to really see a huge increase in violence and suicide and a lot of bizarre behaviors that we haven't seen, because for a very short period of time, only in the last 60 years, have we really started medicating, intoxicating our brain with these incredibly toxic substances.
The very real probability of significant long and short-term side effects should give anyone considering taking psychotropic drugs great pause. But what about those already taking them, who, no matter how hard they try, cannot get off?
Here's what we've been doing. Mood stabilizers, bipolar. That's what that usually gets used for. And listed side effects so that you know what's going on, be informed. Then we've got antipsychotics. I'm sure, olanzapines, risperidone, these types. Again, you need to know what's going on. Anti-anxiety drugs, psychostimulants given to kids with ADHD, psychiatric drugs in general, and antidepressants, the ones that you heard about there, and the horrendous paradoxical effects, including suicide, that go along with those particular drugs.
Are you aware there are 40 to date, 47 young people have committed suicide in the Bridgend area?
Yeah, we did that just now.
Yeah, we just discussed that. Oh, right.
We did.
I didn't hear it.
Oh, we certainly got that.
The other point I'd like to make, December the 1st, we had an adjournment debate in Parliament on no duty of candour. So patients are very vulnerable in the hands of the medical profession. If doctors have no duty of candour to tell the parents the truth, how can the patient be sure that the doctor's functioning in their best interest?
The point with that is to be informed and ask.
You can ask, but they still can withhold vital evidence. That was held in Parliament on the 1st of December 2010. It was Parliament agreed that this must be changed. Unfortunately, it's now being subverted by the House of Lords.
Right, right.
So we're fighting tirelessly in the interest of patients.
Okay.
And no duty of candour. So therefore, they can kill, they can assault, they can poison patient babies and children, and are not accountable to anyone.
Obviously something needs to be done.
That's a serious statement to make, but it's factual and was pointed out in Parliament.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, when you watch that clip, and it can be quite sort of shocking to the average run-of-the-mill person, especially all the side effects that have been, or the adverse reactions that have been produced by those chemicals that people have asked to swallow. Now, the sad thing about it is that the medical profession in this country, doctors have the protection of clinical judgment. Now, if a doctor thinks by giving you a pill, and even if one of those has been removed from the chemist shelves as a result of a withdrawal by government, doctors can still prescribe that medication, and the doctor is protected by clinical judgment. And so, as far as doctors are concerned, there is no, what's the word? There is no threat to the doctor in any way, shape or form, and for doctors continue down this road of prescribing this toxin, poisonous toxins, and that's what they are. It doesn't say a lot for the medical profession in this country.
Indeed. And the gentleman here, he brought up the word that I would use, and that is accountability. There is no accountability. But if we can, it's a matter of
be responsible.
Be responsible.
Yeah.
If you're going to prescribe, you're the prescriber of giving somebody a particular chemical, there has to be accountability. If you did it, you know how you'd feel if you gave somebody something, and they ended up with a bit of food poisoning or something. Oh, sorry, I feel really bad about that. Just from your own home cooking. And yet, a doctor who gives a chemical, a prescribed chemical, and yet somebody may die, well, where's the accountability? Yeah, he's not going to feel very good about it, but at the same time, there's got to be some accountability.
Honesty doesn't always portray itself in the white medical cloth.
No, I agree. I completely agree.
Maybe in medical.
But then, if one is informing, if we're going to inform, be fully informed before the event. There's going to be a bit more. You've got more knowledge. You've got more.
Even if you are informed and something goes wrong, there are so many factors they can bring in. I mean, this isn't any psychiatric. I went to hospital for a minor operation, ended up septicemia. I'd signed everything, if I didn't have it, I'd done all the tests and so on. And I ended up, let's just say, 5 sets of antibiotics for about 2 to 3 months. If I hadn't gone in when they did, I'd have been losing parts of me. And they just said, oh, in this case, they said, you're clinically obese. Not quite, I've been this weight for 25 years. No, that's it, go away. And there's so much that they can use. That's short and sharp, that one. But when it comes to mind, well, there were other factors we didn't realise that were deep-seated neurosis that the drugs brought out. And it goes on and on and on. Because it's sort of like saying, oh, we didn't know about that, but then this came out, and it was a combination of those two together, and so on. There's so much they can use.
Right. Why are they using things like this? It's to evade the risk of liability.
To save money.
No, to save the risk of liability as well.
Yeah, to save money, so that way the legal medical fees or whatever, the insurance, doesn't go up.
Right. Good point. Last bit. It's funny, it's a chapter called Picking Up the Pieces, What You Should Do. It comes down to the, what can you do?
Just say no.
You can say no for sure.
I've got the statistical manual DVD and a couple of others at home, right? I took all three to a GP about 7 months ago and offered him in Westbourne, and he had a quick look at them. He said he didn't want to take them off me because he said he had a family to support and he would probably lose his job. This is what he said. So I get a feeling he's involved in.
At least he was
a
honest.
non-psychiatric GP would accept the DVDs and look at them.
Okay.
No, they don't wish to know. The Emperor has no clothes. I don't wish to know. Thank you. We will carry on. Because if that means that they have to face what they've been doing with a good heart for the last 25 years is completely wrong, a lot of them cannot face that concept. They can't hack it.
Right. So what actions... What actions can concerned citizens take to educate themselves on the real risks of modern psychotropic drug treatments? So we are concerned citizens. I don't think we'd be here if we're not concerned citizens. I don't think there's one unconcerned citizen here tonight. What can we do? You're probably, here comes the point, you're probably asking yourself, if these drugs are not the solution, what can be done? That may be one thing you're asking yourself, but I get the other point that you just said. Now, non-psychiatric solutions do exist, contrary to public opinion. Now, the point being is, what are they? You may not, it comes back to the point that you made, due to pressure from psychiatry and the drug companies, those solutions may not be known. They're going to be suppressed, whether by your GP, because you go to him and you say, take a look at this, and he says, nah. Or they're just suppressed generally, because there may be vested interests involved. Now, this final chapter covers some of the options.
Can I just also just say something very quickly on the natural remedies? That if anybody actually looks on the internet, natural medicine is under major attack. Worldwide, it's under major attack.
So is the natural world.
Yes.
Tonight on the television.
Sorry, Brian, carry on.
So it's actually possible for the GP to be suppressed?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. This surgery gets a lot of the drugs free. There's some form of merry-go-round financial roundabout that say you take and prescribe all the drugs, your surgery gets, let's just say, money from central government or something. I don't profess to know it all, but yeah, but essentially the GPs are bought by the drugs companies.
I think the average wage of a GP I saw in the newspaper is £100,000 a year. That's bought already. You know what I mean? And there's not a GP there who paid for his own education. So his education was paid for him. He's on a huge amount of money. And I'll tell you what, it's like they don't know what they're doing.
Okay.
Unfortunately, everybody's browbeaten, ultimately, and again, I come back to one of my major subjects. They're browbeaten by laws written by the fraternity of judiciary and legal people. They are all browbeaten. Oh, you can't do this. Ooh, you know.
Is it also, if you've done something long enough, you tend to just go along with it anyway?
It becomes accepted as the norm.
Right, okay.
You know, whereas, yeah, again, free-thinking people, if you suddenly go, oh, hang on a minute, what about doing this over there? Oh, no, you can't do that.
It's the definition of insanity, not doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. It's just not what psychiatrists say.
Don't know what you mean, don't know what you mean, don't know what you mean. Let me play the last bit. This is looking at, it covers some of the options of what we can do. You know, if we're going to inform, what are our options? Let me play this last bit.
Looking at your diet to start with.
It's not a bad idea.
Just doing a good walk every day.
I like it.
After all that we have seen, should we believe psychiatrists when they claim that just around the corner is their next new breakthrough? And if psychiatry isn't working, where do we go from here? When we look over the landscape, one question becomes clear. How can anyone trust psychiatrists with their mental health? Even psychiatrists interviewed at a recent convention of the American Psychiatric Association readily admit they have no answers.
What is the answer to mental illness? That's too broad of a question to answer.
I don't think there are any answers to mental illness.
So it needs a better answer than the one we have now for mental illness?
I can't even understand the question.
These are like chronic problems. You can't just cure somebody.
Since psychiatry has no answers, how do we care for those with very real and severe psychological problems? There are, in fact, many, many answers, but you will never hear about them from psychiatrists who prescribe psychotropic drugs. One solution was the Soteria Project, formed in 1971 by Dr. Lauren Mosher, then head schizophrenia researcher at the National Institute of Mental Health.
Lauren Mosher developed this program, through NIMH to look at this, because they were starting to have in the research a debate about whether the medications were actually being helpful or whether they were actually causing some problems.
They would create a community-based center where people diagnosed with schizophrenia could go. It was going to be non-drug oriented because he didn't believe that psychiatric drugs were the answer to schizophrenia.
It provided a place to where there could be people there who would be supportive and be there during the time they have a crisis. Instead of medicating them, be there with them and help them through it.
And the results were staggering. Soteria residents did significantly better than their peers who were on drugs, with far fewer readmissions. The success of Soteria House proved that understanding and compassion could relieve mental turmoil far better than psychiatric treatment, and without the nasty side effects. But despite this, Dr. Mosher's breakthrough would soon be utterly rejected by a psychiatric community dependent on psychotropic drugs and pharmaceutical money. In Dr. Mosher's 1998 resignation letter to the American Psychiatric Association, he wrote, "Psychiatry has been almost completely bought out by the drug companies. We condone and promote the widespread use and misuse of toxic chemicals that we know have serious long-term effects. Is psychiatry a hoax as practiced today? Unfortunately, the answer is mostly yes."
When people ask me about aren't there more places to get this type of treatment and why is biopsychiatry kind of taken over, if they were effective, why did they go away? And I really think that it goes back to the question of money.
Between political pressure exerted by the psychiatric establishment and a lack of funding, refuges like Soteria are few and far between. But they can be found, and the truly troubled can and do recover. But what about common, everyday mental or emotional distresses, such as depression or mood swings? Without using psychiatry, how can we treat those? It's easier than one might think. since there is ample evidence that well over half of all psychiatric problems are actually caused by an underlying, undetected physical condition.
I would say nearly 100% of the time when someone comes in wishing to get off of an antidepressant, I find some underlying issues that weren't addressed originally that may have contributed or else caused their mood disorder.
And you start to look at all the different factors in their life, a lot of times you can find that there's multiple different reasons that someone's not feeling well.
Viruses can cause depression. Digestive issues can cause depression and anxiety. Iron deficiency is very connected to depression. One of the effects of pesticide poisoning is depression.
Little children, if they get a streptococcal infection, can become obsessive and compulsive.
I've seen people with bipolar disorder, manic depression, who have food allergies.
Pretty much any kind of psychiatric problem can be associated with a low thyroid state.
A ton of difficulties that a person has. They can manifest itself as a supposed mental illness, but you fix the hormone, you fix the gland, you fix the nutrition. Miraculously, you can also fix the quote-unquote mental illness.
Why a psychiatrist cannot get to the root of a person's problem, that's the million-dollar question. I have absolutely no idea. They could. They learn it in school. They could just as easily run a blood test as I could run a blood test. They could run all the diagnostic tests. I can. They study anatomy, physiology, pathophysiology. They just choose on their own to treat symptoms.
What about others whose psychological problem is not due to an underlying physical problem?
Divorcing parents, a change in babysitters, moving in the middle of a school year. Those can cause disruptions in the normal flow of sitting in a class and paying attention.
Good things are seen as stressful as bad things. Buying a house can be as stressful as losing a house. Getting married can be as stressful as getting divorced. But it may be some situational anxiety, situational depression that would have resolved on its own years ago. And the patient's been on medicine for years.
Well, it is ridiculous to think that normal depression or grief from normalized circumstances should be treated with medication. We didn't think this way before we had them, because people just took it for granted that life was difficult at times. It was stressful, painful, and, difficult emotions, be they anger, pain, sadness, grief. All these things are normal reactions, and to cover that up with medication is really to turn your back on what makes us human beings, which is our emotions.
Of course, serious mental problems do at times require the assistance of others. But because of the massive money power of pharmaceutical companies that keeps paid psychiatrists propped up in positions of influence over the public, the media, and the rest of the medical field, the only treatment you will ever hear of is psychotropic drugs. But there is one thing the consumer can't do: insist on full and accurate informed consent.
Informed consent boils down to the patient must be told about their diagnosis and what the risks and benefits and alternatives are to the treatment. Risks and benefits and alternatives to the treatment, risks, benefits, and alternatives to not treatment.
So what are the key points of informed consent when it comes to psychotropic drugs? 1. Psychiatric disorders are not actual diseases requiring medical treatment. 2. There is no scientific proof that psychiatric drugs resolve or cure any mental problems. 3. Psychiatric drugs mask symptoms and come with severe short and long-term side effects. 4. Psychiatric drugs can cause dependency and addiction. 5. Most mental problems are caused by an underlying physical illness. 6. No matter how severe the emotional or psychological distress, there are many effective options that do not involve psychiatric drugs. Unfortunately, these points are rarely told to patients.
I have over 2,000 clients, and I can honestly say 100% of them that have come to me, it has either been suggested that they take psychiatric drugs or they actually have taken them. And probably 70 to 80% have actually fallen into the trap and taken the psychiatric drugs because they didn't know what else to do.
50% of patients who are not treated for depression come out of it on their own, without any therapy. Okay, that's never on an informed consent, but it is effective. So, there's never a full informed consent.
but the truth is coming out. 14 U.S. state laws now severely restrict the psychiatric labeling and drugging of children. And a 2004 federal law prohibits school personnel from forcing parents to medicate their sons or daughters with psychotropics. Meanwhile, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has slapped their black box warning label on antidepressants for suicide in children and teenagers, and another warning on stimulants for heart attack, stroke, and sudden death in people of all ages. On another hand, psychiatric survivors are now successfully pursuing legal remedies for the crippling effects of psychotropic drugs. Since 2005, there have been 50,000 individual product liability and personal injury lawsuits filed against drug companies for damage caused by psychotropic drugs, an average of 34 suits a day. Eli Lilly, accused of illegally marketing its antipsychotic Zyprexa, has paid out more than $2.5 billion in settlements to 34 states and 31,000 plaintiffs. In 2009, drug maker Pfizer agreed to forfeit over $2.3 billion, in part for colluding with a psychiatric front group to illegally market its antipsychotic Geodon. Yet with yearly pharmaceutical revenues around $600 billion, drug companies treat judgments and penalties as just a cost of doing business. In fact, billions have been set aside in advance for just that purpose.
The pharmaceutical industry has such a huge financial base that even hundreds of millions of dollars in fines is basically meaningless to them.
Fines for some of these transgressions are like petty cash to the big companies. They're more concerned about the reputation that might be damaged by this. The main thing they do there is just try to hide the fact. And the quickest way to hide the fact is to quickly pay the fine and get out of town.
And this opens the door to enterprising attorneys, but they have to be prepared.
Lawyers need to understand that they do not receive adequate scientific training to conduct these cases by themselves. They need to gather together a team of experts who will help them to do these cases wisely and well. And then other people will begin to see the rates of success that we have had over the last 12 years doing what I call science-intensive litigation.
You have to go to the experts in the field and say, okay, bring your expertise to bear, come to court, and tell people what you know.
I have found that there's an overwhelming number of people that when they see the atrocities that have occurred with psychiatry and the way people have been treated, they are very willing to come over and testify against psychiatry and testify against techniques that are being used.
The court system is just one area where people are speaking out. You too can help by sharing this documentary with coworkers, clients, patients, friends, and loved ones. In doing so, you will answer our final question. What can I do to protect our world from the scourge of psychiatry and psychotropic drugs? Get the facts at cchr.org.
Ryan, one thing that clip doesn't mention is blood tests. Now, I'm aware that the anorexia nervosa, the slimming disease, eating disease, it's a zinc deficiency, but doctors will send you all down the psychiatry track. And a simple blood test which would discover that. You've got the other condition where mothers reject a baby at birth. Now that is, again, I think that is a magnesium deficiency, which has an effect on the thyroid, which then sets up an imbalance where you get this change of personalities, aggression, this sort of thing with mothers, and complete rejection of the child. But it's just a simple blood test, and the doctors carried out that blood test. But there are so many different blood tests you can ask for. You've got to ask for a specific one. And the medical profession, well, this is where they're all tied up with the pharmaceutical companies, is that you go into hospital or ask your doctor for a blood test, and he can affect the cause of the condition. Now, as I said earlier on, treating the symptoms, there's money in it. There's no profit in the cause. So if you have the blood test and the doctor can establish within a very simple test what is causing you a problem, he can direct the right medicine to counteract whatever is causing the problem.
Right. So it comes back to the point, I take your point on board, and that is that there's probably a host of different things that can be done, various tests, but not even one test is being done. The undiagnosed physical condition that manifests as a so-called mental illness is key. If these tests are done to find that, just one brief example, there was a young child who is anecdotal story that given to me, was at a particular time of the year going completely haywire, very difficult to control, bad behaviour. It was only a particular time of the year. Went off down the doctor route, then got secondary care with the psychiatrist. Later was hyperactive, but the parent then took that child to an allergy specialist, found that they had a particular allergy to a pollen at that time of year, gave the antidote, well, hyperactivity miraculously disappeared. It was an undiagnosed physical condition. It was not hyperactivity or so-called ADHD. So it's key to find that undiagnosed physical condition, and that's one of the things that, what can I do?
But equally, what has to be said, these conditions can come out, they can vary. I mean, you touched on pollen. I've never had hay fever in my life except once. Coming back from the Isle of Man, I was having hay fever and I was falling asleep on a motorbike. And a mate of mine had to tell me what it was, because the penny never dropped. I had to stop. And eventually at 6 o'clock, I suddenly felt better. Not that it was too bad, but obviously that was the pollen going down. I've never had that before or since.
Interesting.
Yeah, so whilst this isn't emergency ward 10, there is the fact that certain things, like that seasonal one, they ebb and they flow.
Yeah.
That's the point I want to make.
Right, they ebb and they flow, but it's important to recognise that.
You can't always.
No, point taken.
I think we have to accept that a lot of this is deliberate. They can't, these are highly educated people. They know they're masking the fact that we just need to eat proper food. We need to have a non-toxic air, water, soil, talk to the natives in the Andes or somewhere. It's all known, and we need to address our emotional states. And when you've got a hyperactive kid, it's unhappy. Get and see Super Nanny. The parents are probably stupid. And we have to address our emotional selves and what we put in our bodies. And I think this is all known by these people.
Indeed, indeed. And that point itself, if you have a poor diet, you could have an undiagnosed physical condition. A poor diet can be a physical condition. It's not necessarily recognised, it's not medical as such, But
a poor diet is going to affect all the tissues of your body, all the cells of your body, the energetic aura of your body, your chakras, everything, whether you receive light from the cosmos or not. That is true.
Yes. I think that's a good point to end off on. I want to thank you all very much for being here, staying with me, and showing an interest, and I'm really pleased to get your feedback. And if there's any questions, I don't know what the time is, but it may be late. So if you want to, you can contact us at our office, and whatever way you want to contact us, please do. We've got the copies of the Marketer's Madness at the back. Take it, show it to your friends, get the word out there. Make sure that people are fully informed.
How about these booklets?
Yeah, they're at the back as well. They are available.
Very informative.
Thank you.
Thank you.